Okay, our next speaker is a longtime partner with Ministry to Muslims. He does a lot of online apologetics, polemics. He is one of his areas of expertise is the English translations of the Quran, and that's what he's going to discuss today. So let's welcome up Professor Jim.
Thank you. Let me just do a little unpacking here first. All right, if we can get the PowerPoint up and running. So let me just introduce myself. Yeah, I've been here with George and Ministry to Muslims, oh my word, since before the beginning of the whole, even September 1st, our Strong Tower conference. So I've been here with George a lot, in and out. I've been focusing a lot really on, I'll show you when I get to the end of it, on Seventh-day Adventism. But I ended up doing a paper. I went back to school to get a second master's degree. Got first one in business, went back to get a second one in humanities, majoring the emphasis in philosophy and religion. And that's kind of where this one came out. I wrote my master's thesis on English translations of the Quran. So with that I'm going to start basically with English Qurans in general. I'm going to end with really a focus on the English translation. That's really what I'm here for. There is no information, like I said, on the direct translation of the Quran of the Prophet Muhammad until about 55 AD. It was done by a Persian, actually. So translation of this book is a controversy, and it's still a controversy today. There's a couple dots on translating the Quran. Well, you can't communicate it. That's why most of the translations, as you know, when you look at them, it says what? A meaning of the Quran. It doesn't say it is the Quran, though some do, by the way, at least in English. It says it's a meaning because they say, well, we can't really translate it. And the schools of Islamic jurisprudence, law, they kind of weigh in on this. And you can see I got the three big ones there. And some of them say, well, in terms of translation, you can see that the Hanafi says, well, the early opinion is, well, we'll allow some translation and recital at prayer, etc. So even the major schools of Islam will disagree on, can we translate our book or can't we translate our book? The first translation into, I just want to call them maybe Middle Eastern, Islamic languages. And I'm not even talking about whole translations of the Quran. Some of these I'm talking about just pieces and parts. And you can see I got a few of them up here. Syriac it was one of the first ones. There was a possible, no one's ever seen it. I kept reading references to it of a Berber translation about 127 years after the Hijra. Some of the earliest translations in Persian are about 956 AD. Got a Turkish one, 1333. I mean, think about these. So the Quran is staying in Arabic. They're not putting it out there in other languages. And we got an Urdu translation, 1776. Now, the invention of the printing press changed the world. I know a lot of you have, of course, already know that. I'm saying something to speak in the profoundly obvious, but I read this book, and I don't even remember why I read it. Maybe it was just a general interest in Mr. Gutenberg himself, but he mentioned Muslims in this book. And I'm like, oh, well, that was interesting, because what he actually said in this book, when he starts talking about translations, of course, got Gutenberg starting at about 1452 with his press. 1454, the first volume rolls off of it. And to me, it's just, what a coincidence in history, right? You got the first Bible rolling off the press here in 1454, and what happened to Constantinople in 1453? It fell. And a lot of, you'll see in a lot of history, they'll use that as the kickoff point for the Renaissance, for the passing of knowledge, because everybody from Constantinople that had any manuscripts or anything that got out of there went out of there and went to Europe. And that's when it flourished. To me, that was just, as I was reading the book and even thinking about this, and I put those 2 points together and I went, That was interesting. Now, the impact of printing, right? Gutenberg called the father of modernity. I mean, this is huge when you think about what he did. By 1500, about 50 years, 15 to 20 million printed books. Right? This stuff was out of the reach of the average person. Now, they're just, of course, we got the Reformation getting ready to kick off too, right? And now we got the printing press just kicking this stuff out. But I want to say Muslims, I can actually say the Orient, the Eastern world, China. These are cultures which pass knowledge on verbally. The student sits at the master's feet and learns. So Islam, and that was in that book I showed you when he was in that book about Gutenberg, when he was talking about it, and he was contrasting Europe and the Orient, and he specifically mentioned Islam. He said, and the Islamic world didn't have the first bit of interest in the printing press, because that's not how we transmit knowledge. Student sits at teacher's foot and learns verbally. Well, I want to say I think that's the point in time, because any of you ever, you read, you study Islam, there's something that I've always noticed about Islam when I study it. Even modern Muslims will say today, they'll just complain and bemoan. They're like, oh, what happened to us? We were such a glorious, powerful nation. What happened to us? I want to say this is one of the things that happened. Really, you shunned the printing press. And with that was the knowledge that came with it. Now, right, because it was at the, right, madrasas. That's how you learn. You go to the school, you learn from the teacher. You're not necessarily learning and bringing books. Now, the printed book remained a secondary thing in the Muslim world, and even as late as the 19th century. You think, that's a big deal. You can think, what was the printed book look like? How was it regarded in Germany and England and France? Yeah, it was regarded. In the Muslim world, Middle Eastern world, not so much. Relatively few books were created by Muslims for Muslims. But what they did do is they relied on there was a lot of translations. They would translate Greek and Latin books into Arabic. And this really kicked off, I want to say, from what I remember about my reading, particularly around the 1940s, 1930s. Now, the first Qur'an, printed Qur'an, came from the West. It was Latin, 1543. And I love this quote by Martin Luther. I absolutely love it. He says this, because people were worried. They're going, whoa, what are we doing in the West printing the Quran? That evil satanic book. No, we shouldn't be printing that. And Luther said, nah, I got a different idea. And it might be hard to read. I'll do my best to even read it here myself. Luther said this, I am convinced. Now, remember, it's the Turks at the time who had the caliphate. So he's talking to them. I am convinced that nothing more irksome and harmful could possibly be done to Muhammad or the Turks, more than with weapons, than the publication among Christians of their Quran. In other words, read it. You read it. And then he says, by reading it, Christians may see what an utterly accursed, shameful, wretched book it is, full of lies, fables, abominations. Therefore, my kind and Christian petition to you, he says, my gracious and dear sirs, is be pleased to allow this book freely to circulate without hindrance for the glory of Christ, for the good of Christians, for the harm of the Turks, and the disgust of the devil. And I went, yeah, right? Isn't that a great quote? So Luther said, no, we don't got to be afraid of this. Print it. And they did. So here's a listing of the printings that kicked off in the Western world. So 1543, that Latin one came out. And 4 years later, Italy. Then you see Germany, French, English, Russian. Do you see a trend right now? Where's the Middle Eastern countries printing their book? We get to Urdu, right? 1776. Hungarian, Persian, Turkish. Look how late it's getting now. They don't translate their book. Remember, they got a philosophy behind this book, don't they? And that is, if you don't read Arabic, you can't learn my religion. Right? The God of Muhammad is crippled linguistically. right? In terms of what he can understand. So Middle Eastern translations, I want to say that, are problematic to a certain degree. Some Muslims say, and there is still a verse to it, as you can see here. They say, we can't do it. It's in 1659, and some imam ruled that the Quran in Persian, haram, don't do it. Can't put it even in the Persian language. Al-Azhar, 1936, a fatwa, translations that the impossibility of transferring its meaning. Again, like I said, now we know why we see in the Quran, most of them, it says meaning of the Quran, right? I think they're following direction here from Al-Azhar in 1936. So, and you know this already, the religion of Islam must be conducted in Arabic. And whether you know it or not, right? We all know this, and if you don't, you'll learn it soon. When you talk to some Muslims, and you can say, when you pray, do you pray in Arabic? Yeah? You understand what you're praying? No. No clue. They'll speak it. They'll say it. It's like a magic charm in a way, if I speak Arabic or something. But yeah, and that's where it's coming from. Yeah, it is a mantra. It is. All right. There are about 80 individual, I'm going to say, language translations available of the Quran. Of all the languages that the Quran is printed in, the English Quran is the third most printed Quran. That, in my mind, when I learned that, I went, that makes the English Quran an important Quran. The third most printed Quran. Of course, the first most printed Quran in any language is Arabic, right? Hands down. Number two is Urdu, and then English. Oh, wow. So like I said, I think, it's my opinion, and I put this in my thesis when I did my thesis on English translations. I said, it's one of the most influential Qurans in the world. It's number 3, English. This is my list, by the way, and I don't expect you to read it. Nobody knows how many English translations of the Quran there are. There is no place that you can go to say, how many English Qurans are there today in 2023? I don't know. Nobody knows. I've been doing my best to try to figure it out. This is my as you can tell, Microsoft Excel list that I keep a running list. I have 80 in my list here. I know it's not complete because I know there's translations I don't know about. I'm probably probably this page here, I'm probably 97, 98% certain that's correct. But the later I get, nah. And by the way, I'm only interested in whole Qurans. I'm not interested in, where they do some verses here. No, I want the whole Quran. And that's what I've been trying to keep a list of that. By the way, I have my list available if you want it. These slides are available if you want it. I have them on a USB drive. I'll send them to you. If you find Qurans that you know of that aren't on my list, tell me. I want to know. I want to keep my list. So you can see colorings where I started grouping them. The pink grouping and orange and green. And then I go on to continue the green, the blue, and I'll talk about these groups. But that's my list of roughly 80 individual translations. Here's what I did. Here's what I did with the Qurans. This was my interest. I had to write a thesis, and you only got so much time to do it. And I thought, I'm gonna write this thesis on why did the particular Quran translator create that Quran? I'm not comparing the verses. I'm not comparing, Surah 434 from this one to that one to see what they did or didn't do, which is a good verse to compare. But I'm not doing that. I'm just looking at why did they make this book and try to figure out what's going on based on that. And I think you'll find some of that will be interesting. All right, what I want to do, and I need to work with George on this. This is just, I don't expect you to read this. This is one example. What I want to do eventually, and I have about 5 or 6 verses here from the Quran. There's about 5 or 6 verses that are my go-to verses when I want to test the Quran. You want to test the Bible, right? You pick it up and you go to what? John 1:1, John 10:30 through 33. There's other Trinitarian verses that I can go to test the Bible. Well, I got verses I go to when I want to test the Quran. And Surah 434 is one of my favorite ones, right? And those of you that aren't familiar with that yet, that's where a man has a permission to beat his wife when she misbehaves. And I love to see how, especially Quranic Muslim translators, kind of smooth over that. Tap her lightly, or something. So anyway, I have a list of verses, and that's what I want to do eventually with all my English Qurans. Is I just kind of want to do a summary of who's the translator, why did they make this translation, these key verses, list them out, do a comparison between them. I just think that'd be helpful. One of these days, I'm going to do this and get this on George's website. So you saw the colored in the Excel file. The first little tiny grouping was a bunch of pink ones. What I did was I did this in early 2000s, this thesis of mine, and I've kind of changed the way I'm even thinking about it today, but I grouped them in 3 groups at that point. And I called the first group this one. There are 3 periods. And the first period is 1649 to 1904. This is it, listen to this. All Qurans created in English were created by Christians for Christians. End of story. That's it. 256 years. Matter of fact, and I'll talk about them here in a minute. Here's 256 years of Quran translation. This is it. The first 1649 Quran, followed by Torksdale in 1734, Rodwell in 1861, and Palmer in the 1880. This is your first 250 years of Quran translation, created by a Christian for Christians. So that was my first period. I thought, well, because there's a big break after that. And we go to the second period. And this is where I would change even today. I did 1905 to 1960. I think I still would keep 1905. But I would probably go to about 1940-ish because of World War II. Because the world changed during World War II. People traveled around like they never did before. And particularly to the Middle East. So I think I would probably change it then, and I would probably go to the 1940s. But nonetheless, I'll just stick with this. Even during this time frame, you look what's changing now. 1905 to 1960, 54 years, much smaller. I got about 15 translations. 11 are by Muslims. 2 of them are by the Ahmadiyas. Are you familiar with Ahmadiyas? Oh, yeah. They probably caused a little controversy in the world, don't you think, when they threw a Quran translation out there? Because the Muslims don't even regard them as Muslim, right? Got 4 translations by Westerners. 15 translations, but 4 are by Westerners. Now, the sequence of Qurans, creating Qurans for Christians, broken. And shall not return, by the way. So that's gone. The first English Quran by a Muslim was 1905. I don't have that one. I'd almost give my left arm to find that one. I have been looking for decades to find that one. Now, Muslim that created this, a Muslim creating a Quran in English did it on the Indian subcontinent. Gee, any idea why a Muslim would do that on the Indian subcontinent in 1905? Because who was in India? England. And all these English sailors are over there going, they're talking to their Muslim friends and they're engaging them in dialogue. And the Muslims like, we got to get our Quran and we're going to get it in their language and we're going to give it to them the other way around. And so it starts. So 1905 was the first Muslim actually put a Quran into English. I have a number of, in my idea, what I call firsts, like first Quran in English. And then I got this one from 1930, which you just saw previously by Muhammad Pickthall. That is the first translation by a Western convert to Islam, done by Muhammad Pickthall in 1930. I think the most unique translation, I had to call it the most confusing translation because it really is confusing, is by George Bell in 1937. Whew. He's got a whole theory and thought about how the Quran was put together and stacked up and manuscripts and bones, how it was put together. And he's got all these dotted lines in the book. He says, well, I really think this verse here should be followed by skip 26 pages and go over here and look. It's like, he was trying to put it together and trying to make it coherent, but it's pretty confusing. But hey, I'll take anything that adds, knowledge to this field. So 1905 to 1960. 54 years, 15 Qurans. Muslims now are starting to translate. 1961 to present. I would change that today. I would probably start at about 2001 because I think something changed about 2001 in terms of Quran. I'm serious. I'm not even being funny. I'm serious. When I look at my list that I showed you and I'm looking at it, I'm going, no, I should rethink that. But anyway, I'll stick with this. There still remains no comprehensive list of English Qurans, by the way, okay? This just doesn't exist. I got about 61 translations in this period. 1961 to today, 61. Virtual abandonment by the West. I got two. One from 1997, one from 2013. That's it. I got translations by women now starting to show up. Ahmadiyya, husband and wife team, did a translation of the Quran. I got Sufi translations, husband and wife. What I'm also finding, let me see if I can say it here, is during this period, the Muslim translations explode. And what I started noticing were, Muslims are fighting other Muslims. Oh, Muhammad so-and-so over here, translation, that's not really that good. Look at mine. And then I started noticing, then they started getting stamps in the books, certificates. I took mine to, some Islamic, university in Pakistan, and I got some imam to say, I hereby certify this book is accurate to stamp. So I started noticing stamps. There's a competition going on between the Muslims in their own Quran who are upset at other Muslims making Qurans because they don't think they're that good. And by the way, when I read the preface of the books, they often still refer to these first 4 books that I showed you here. Oh, Muslims have a real problem with this guy. Oh, they can't stand him. Still today, he gets under their skin. This is Reverend Rodwell's Quran in 1861. Here's what he did first. He rearranged the surahs. He said, I'm going to put them in the order I think they need to go in. And he did that, And, so you can read a preface to a Quran today and they'll go, oh, that evil Reverend Rodwell messing with our Quran in 1861, So they still reference these books. Say again? I think so. It's pretty much, from what I've seen, there's another scholar named Noldiki who kind of did the same thing and rearranged. They try to make the best they can. They think, well, I think, the Surah 96 was maybe perhaps the first one. We're going to put that first and second. So, yeah. Now, here's the first translation by a woman, period. Not with her husband, just period. And that was pretty interesting. I remember when that came out, it kind of caused a little uproar. 2007. Okay, first Quran printed in the English language, Alexander Ross, 1649, and this is it. This Quran. Now, when I say translation, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wow, and there he is. There's Alexander Ross sitting at his desk, and he's got an Arabic Quran in front of him. He's translating this book. No, he's got a French Quran in front of him, and he's translating this book. This is a translation from the French, and the French is, in 1647, by the way, is a translation from Arabic. So, not a true translation, but it's the first time it was put in English. Matter of fact, this is phenomenal. There's a story here. Someone needs to make a movie about this. Here's Alexander Ross in 1649. If you know your English history, what in the world was going on in England in 1649? We had something called the English Civil War. Charles I, off with your head. Oliver Cromwell steps in. He's not king, he's Lord Protectorate of England. He's not Catholic. Alexander Ross is Catholic. Alexander Ross wants to print the Quran on English soil as a Catholic, and we have Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protectorate of England, that says, arrest that man. Seize that book. And they did. And I still wonder today, I would love to know if this was sitting in the Tower of London for a while. Because they were. Arrest the printer, seize the books, and find this Alexander Ross guy. Call him in. Well, Alexander Ross found out he had a warrant for his arrest, turned himself in, and had a conversation with the new English, with Cromwell and his Lord Protectorates. Unfortunately, no transcripts of that meeting survive. But I can tell you that when you look in the back of this book, and I have, and I read it, this guy is upset. And it comes out in the last few pages in here because he talks about in essence, I just want to say freedom of speech and freedom to be able to print this book. And he is upset. And he put it in print, and it's here. But, oh, that would be a movie. I would just love to see that. I still would love to know if that was in the Tower of London. Now, the first real Quran translated from Arabic into English is 1734, and that's George Sale, and this is the George Sale Quran. And this thing actually became a textbook. The first, I don't know, I want to say about 200 pages of this. And the reason why I say it's a textbook, because he does like a history of Islam and Muslims in this. And it's called, it's Discourse, is the first few pages of this. It's not a popular translation. It's not a good translation. It's very literal translation, so it's not a favorite of a lot of people, but nonetheless, in mile markers, that is the very first one. We have the first Quran printed in America, 1806, printed in Massachusetts. And he actually used Alexander Ross, 1649. So here's the first Quran ever printed on American soil. And like I said about Mr. Rodwell, his 1861 Quran, which still bugs the Muslims today, he rearranged the surahs. Because a lot of Muslims, as you probably know, and even as I read, they think that even the surah arrangement in the Quran, that's divine. And so you can't mess with that. You're not supposed to do that. Now, the first translation, I want to say, like I said, by a Muslim was 1905. That was Muhammad Khan. I would love to find that translation. I can't seem to find it. In fact, I've been to the Library of Congress. I did part of my thesis work at the Library of Congress. I remember going there, signing up, said, let me get my card so I can enter the reading room. So then I can go off the reading room. You've seen the reading room. They always show that. It's got a big dome, all the desk in the middle of it. But off the sides, there's other rooms. And off to one of the sides is the Middle Eastern room. I said, take me to the Middle Eastern room. So I got signed up and I go over there. It's disheartening. I walk in there. I can't think of his name right. He's a Coptic Christian. I'll probably think of his name in a minute. But he, yes, who said that? Boudros. Yes. And he wouldn't touch an Islamic book unless he put on white gloves. Like, okay, come on. Anyway, he took me over and I said, okay, let me see what you got in English. And I was shocked. And I go, oh my word, I've got more English translations of the Quran than the Library of Congress. I do. And so I was surprised. All right, first translation by a Western convert. I think I mentioned that, Muhammad Pickthall, right? First, a British gentleman did that. Now, let me just kind of talk briefly about popular English Qurans. People always like to ask, well, what Quran should I get? Right? And if you ask us, we're all probably going to give you different answers. So I'll just give you my version of it. I like primarily the Yusuf Ali and the Muhammad Mushin Khan when I'm talking to Muslims, because it's a book by Muslims. They're not going to want, if I show up with an Arthur Arbery Quran or an Edward Palmer Quran, they're going to like, no, that's an infidel. I don't want that. I want something translated by a faithful person of my religion. So if you're going to talk to Muslims, that's what I would say. You ought to settle on a book they're going to rely on. They're not going to rely on a book by a Westerner. So you got to get one by someone that's theirs. Now, the Muhammad Ali Quran, which I think is interesting, because that in 1917, that came out of Lahore, Pakistan, Ahmadiyya, the Quran adopted by the Nation of Islam, which is interesting, because the Ahmadiyyas are not Christian. But here's what I was most shocked when it took me forever to get through the preface of that book, because it's huge. When I read that, I went, oh my gosh. I go, that 1917 Quran reminded me of the 1734 George Sale Quran. Because the preface of this book is like, it's a history of Islam. When I read the preface of that 1917 Quran by Muhammad Ali, I was instantly convinced. I go, now I know where the Muslim apologists have the source for their arguments that they use today. It's there. All the arguments are there. If you read the preface of that book from 1917, over 100 years ago, they're there. No one's ever said that, but when I read it, that was my first impression. I went, there it is. There's the source. All right. Non-Muslim source, Arthur Arbery. A lot of people in academia like that. Qur'an, it's a favorite. Some believe it's the best. There's another Westerner, and his book, Droge, 2013. It too, if you read the preface, and I did, it was created for students in academia. So I went, okay, well, that's interesting. So we got the Arbery, 1955. So it's been around for a while. It's a 2-volume set, if you see the first edition hardcover. And created really a favorite of academia. But in 2013, another one showed up on the block. And that's one of the two in that period. I said when a Quran was translated, not by some Muslim engaged in dawah, or trying to convert Christians. His is just one of them. The other one was in 1977 by Colin Turner. All right, the Yusuf Ali translation, which is it's still a popular one. Again, Muhammad Mushin Khan, Yusuf Ali, I think are two still remain somewhat popular. 1934, I've never seen a 1934, ever. I'm almost convinced it doesn't exist. I guess the only other place that I just got to get on an airplane and go to the British Museum, because that would be my next place to go, where they probably, if they have it, it would be there. It found favor with the Saudis, and who the copyright was actually bought and changed, and then they started adding footnotes and making negative comments of the Jews. And I got a note there, someone told the Los Angeles Unified School District, hey, you have a book in here that doesn't speak very nicely of the Jewish people, and they said, okay, we're going to ban it, and they banned it. Don't know if that ban still exists today or not. Muhammad Mushin Khan is probably, between that and Yusuf Ali is the one that I used, 1989. It's really gaining, I think it's gaining in popularity. It almost imposes, and I said that in my notes here, it's got like a medieval commentary sort of attached to it. It's very hard to read in a way. They add a lot of words to the text that's not actually in the Quran. But still, you open up the book and it's certified. It's from the Holy Mosque of Mecca and Medina, and Iman, I don't even remember his name, says, yea, verily, this is a good book. Okay, then I'll run with it and I'll use it. Muhammad Assad was an interesting one. Jewish convert to Islam. Not many of those. Doing Qurans, that is, anyway. There was another one in the list. I didn't bother mentioning him, 1980. But that book got banned in Saudi Arabia because of some doctrinal issues that he was working into the text. I still find some Muslims, I come across them, they like it, but it's still interesting that it was banned. Here's another Western convert to Islam, Dr. T.B. Irving, and his title of his Quran caused a controversy in the early 1980s because he called it the first American version. And that rubbed a lot of Muslims wrong. They're like, yeah, they just didn't like his title. I remember reading his obituary when he died, and I thought, this was so sad. This guy died lonely, depressed, and I remember just reading it myself, just go, wow, this was a sad read. We got Qurans by descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, Shia Qurans. So just keep this in mind, right? A Quran's not necessarily a Quran, because now you got Sufi Qurans, we got Shia Qurans, we got Sunni Qurans, right? And the Sunnis, they find out something from the Shia, what? They almost want to just throw up, right? Right? They just don't get along, right? This is one of my favorite ones. Good old Rashid Khalifa, 1989. I love Greg Maxwell and I love to take this one out on the street, right? Because you hear Muslims say, a Quran's a Quran. No one's ever changed the Quran, right? So you have this guy was crazy. I think, what was it? Was it the number 19? Was it, you remember, Greg? No, but 19. He had a fascination with, everything was 19. Everything proved 19. But anyway, you go to Surah 9. The last two verses in Arabic are missing. I can't tell you how many Muslims we've gone to mosque and they'll say, well, no one's ever changed the Quran. I go, okay, in my backpack, I pull out, here's Rashid Khalifa. Look at this. Oh, we got English and Arabic, right? Hey, let's go to Surah 9. The last two verses are missing. And usually it just gets quiet. You can just hear a pin drop. And by the way, he was assassinated in Arizona by Muslims because they knew what he was doing. They didn't like what he was doing. Let's see. Absolutely. They don't know what to do when they see that. So like I said earlier, it's one of my favorite ones, right? Muhammad Mushrik Khan, when I'm dealing with Muslims. I like to use that one, right? You want to use something other than that, and I think you probably should. Just find, I would just find another translation and find one by a Westerner. I would actually go with that 2013 Droge translation that I mentioned. I would use Arthur Arbery's 1955. Even though the English language may be a bit antiquated, this was Edward Palmer's. This guy's fascinating to read about too, by the way. He was, just read about his life. I wish I had time to tell you about him. Fascinating. He died on a camel in the Middle East. He was murdered. It's a great story. But still, I think very reliable because he was very fluent in Arabic. So that's what I do. I'll find Qur'ans by Westerners who have a command of the language. And what I also like to find, Muslims who have converted to Christianity, who are native speakers, will tell you the truth. The Muslims don't do that in their Qur'ans. But someone who was a Muslim, who's now a Christian and translates the Qur'an, is going to tell you the truth. They're going to tell you 434 says, oh yeah, beat her. All right, I'm going to end it right here. If you want to, there's my email on the very top in yellow letters. You can meet me after if you want. academyapologia@fastmail.com. I have a YouTube channel where I've been here in the last few years dealing with another non-Christian religion called Seventh-day Adventism. I do a lot of other work too. Every once in a while, I'll drop a video on something else, be it Mormons, witnesses, Islam. We have any more time? Minute and a half. I can take one question, I guess. Yes.
Today's my birthday. I just want to know those. Thank you for those 17th or 18th century Qur'an.
No.
Jim, I've got a question. So this, some of you might have this. This is the clear Quran. This is Mustafa Kitab. So this was given to me by an imam. So you're saying this is not one of the ones they'd be likely to accept. Why are they giving it to us if they're not likely to?
Well, you know, we're talking in two ways, right? Because they'll say a Quran in English is not useful, but yet they'll give you one, right? It's hard to reconcile two contradictory statements when most Muslims, as we know, don't even speak Arabic. So yeah, they'll say that, but a lot of them do. I mean, I was in a mosque dialoguing Muslims, and I said something in the imam, the guy was like, he goes, "No, that's not in the Quran." I turned around on the shelf, and all I saw were Yusuf Ali Qurans in their own mosque, and I pulled the Yusuf Ali off and dialogued them. So they do use it, but they'll say they don't or can't. It's a contradiction.
Okay, one more.
Very quick. There was I think it was the last time you came, you mentioned, if it wasn't you, forgive me, but there is a Quran that has a preface that taught that it's not very favorable about the Quran itself. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't. But there are some, because they aren't done by Muslims, who try to do a very accurate rendering of the Quran. Yeah, there are. Yeah. All right. I see my time is up.
Sorry, folks. You can check with them afterwards if you have more questions. Great job, Jim. Thanks.